All right. Welcome everyone who's just about to join. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. We're going to wait for everyone to take a moment and join the webinar, and then we'll get started. So please give it a minute, and then we'll properly get going. Okay, as people are starting to come in, we'll start with a little introduction. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the Q&A session for the infrastructure assessments. If you are completing the real estate assessments, that's tomorrow. This is the wrong webinar. Go back now, return before you're going to do infrastructure and get swayed by the amazing infrastructure assessments that we have. I'm Cathy Granneman. I will do an introduction to the rest of the team in a moment, but today I just wanted to briefly introduce the Q&A. We'll talk through some of our frequently asked questions first. We'll cover some topics that we know a lot of participants are interested in and have questions around, and then we'll open the floor where you can directly ask questions to our team of experts. So I hope you're already and prepared for that, and I hope the session will be very informative. So let's just to go through the agenda again. So first we'll talk about the frequently asked questions. So we'll talk about, we'll first do an introduction to the team, then we'll talk about the frequently asked questions. We'll talk about access rights. We'll talk about managing the assessment. So how can you set up your assessment in our GRESB portal? We'll talk around some of the evidence requirements that we have in the assessments and how you can then also use the portal to your benefit to make sure that you're replying to the right indicators and metrics. Then we'll open the floor for Q&A, and finally we'll close by showing you some of the resources that are available throughout the reporting period. So just as a matter of housekeeping, this is our, there we go. This is our GRESB infrastructure team. Some of them are on the call today. So we have Fabio, who's our intern. We have Fabio, who's on the call. So Fabio, if you want to say hi and wave.
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone.
We have Aurelian Reynolds, who's not on the call, but some of you may know him. We do have David Tassadogh. David, also, hi.
Good morning, good afternoon.
We have Joss on the call as well, who's recently joined the team. Joss, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
He is our infrastructure director. We have Roxana, who's not on the call, who's the chief product officer. There's myself, Cathy Granneman, manager in the member relations team, and your direct account manager for any infrastructure related queries. We have David Thomas, who's our business development director. We have Robert Schloko, who's recently joined, who's our sales director in the Americas. Dan Winters, veteran of the GRESB assessments, who is our senior director on strategic initiatives based in the US. And another recent hire, Tom, who's joined as head of Americas. So some of these faces may be new to you and some of them may be familiar, but regardless, we have an amazing team and hopefully they'll be able to cover all of the questions that you have today. So you can already start using the Q&A function to ask questions. We'll actually start answering them once we go through the frequently asked questions. If you have any questions, please use that button and don't use the chat function because it will help our panelists to answer your questions a bit more appropriately and to make sure that the right people answer the right questions. So that's just for our benefit and yours. But without further ado, let's get started and tackle some of those frequently asked questions. So first thing to talk about are access rights. So this is something that comes up quite a lot. We have obviously a lot of information in our assessments, but how can you make sure that the right people see the right things? So we have listed some of these questions and we've also included some screenshots in order to help you with tackling that. So one thing we get asked a lot is around the access rights for investors. And particularly how to grant or revoke access. So Fabio, how would you explain this to people when they come to you with this question?
Yes, thanks, Katie. Well, first of all, it's important to say that any type of request, and the control within this request, it's up to participants to decide. We do have, as you may know, like a quite strict policy when it comes to data confidentiality. So when you will have a request or you want to approve one of these requests, you can entirely do that on your own in the portal. And how you do so? Well, you log into portal.gresb.com, and then from there, you will go on the assessment portal, which is displayed on the right-hand side. And you will indeed see the snapshot or something similar to what you see now with all your entities. So then you will go into access as highlighted here. Katie, maybe you can go on the next slide as well. And from there, you will be able to monitor and, well, to manage all the access rights for that specific entity. And well, you see two sections here. In the second section, indeed, we are looking at investor access rights. So you will have the possibility to grant or, of course, deny even an access right to a certain specific GRESB member. And by clicking that button, indeed, you will be prompted to this page. And here you will see an overview of all the requests. Of course, if there is a new request, that will be a pending item displayed at the very bottom of the page, at the top of the page, sorry. And well, there you will be able to make your own selection, either accept or decline it. And of course, you will be able to control all the other investor access that have been there for already quite some time. And potentially, if you deem it necessary, revoke the access for those entities. And well, if you forget or if you don't see these items in the portal, it's also important to say that GRESB does send automatic reminders so that you are aware of who's asking access to your own entities.
Great, thanks, Fabio. And that kind of ties in nicely with the next question that we see a lot is around access rights for users, right? So when you want to add people, whether it be colleagues or consultants or other members of your company that need to get access to the assessment, how can you make sure the right people see the right things?
Right. Well, this is indeed a very similar procedure, although the access rights in this case are for users. So we do have different type of users, and I'm gonna display those in a moment. But generally speaking, you follow the same approach we just outlined before. So you log into the assessment, you go into the specific entities, and you go in manage access rights. And there you will be able, if you're an account manager of the entity, to invite new collaborators. As you can see from this snapshot, indeed, there are different ways to add collaborators. And of course, you also have the possibility to revoke access. Katie, if you move to the next slide, we will see those in more details. Indeed, once you, of course, invite a new user, the user will receive the request. And depending on the type of access, you will have different access rights within the entity itself. So, of course, the only people that are supposed and responsible for submitting assessments will be account managers, as you see here, or for inviting new user. You do have the ability and opportunity to invite external contributor if you're an account manager, which are able and have less functionalities like edit responses, but cannot upload documents, for instance. So that's also very useful. And generally speaking, we as GRESB ask account managers of the entity to invite new users. So that's generally speaking how it works, the access rights from the user side.
Thanks, Fabio. And that kind of brings us to the next part of the frequently asked questions, which is around managing the assessment. So you've got your investor access, you've got your user set up, and you are ready to go, but you first need to sort of set up the assessment. And so one of the questions that we see a lot is around prefill, and this is a crucial one to get right? Because if this goes wrong, that's maybe problematic. Fabio,
Right.
can you help participants with that?
Indeed. So some of you may already have started assessments, but if you didn't start one yet, when you will go into the portal and select the intent to submit an assessment, before even starting to filling in informations, you will be prompted to this page. And in this page, you are able to select different options. And one of those is indeed the prefill. Of course, a prefill option is displayed only if you are a participant in 2021. Otherwise, there is no data to prefill. It's very important to say that, if you decide yes to prefill this information, that option will not be reverted. So you're not able to change this option at a later stage. And we already got some questions like around which indicators are supposed to be prefilled, or what can I see, what is prefilled? we do have some documents that we'll outline later on, but generally speaking, in the reference guides, you're able to see per indicator which type is prefilled and to which extent. So that's how it works. And indeed, if you select no to the prefill, that will be also right, but you will see a blank asset, that's asset assessment that you will have to fill from scratch.
Yeah, that's a good one. So please make sure you've decided upon this before you start the assessment to save you lots of problems later on if you accidentally click no and then you do need the pre-fill. So this is just a friendly reminder to all of you about to start their assessments as well. Now that's great, we have the pre-fill, but one other topic that we see coming in a lot as on our help desk, but also I know from personal experience, a lot of members who are just starting off with the GRESB reporting are asking about this, and it's around asset grouping. So say I have a bunch of assets around the globe, some of them share processes and some of them don't, but how do I go about making sure that I'm grouping the right assets into the right assessments, right? I don't want to create too much work, but I also want to sort of have accurate benchmarking. So Fabio, what are some of the takeaways we would say to these participants?
Well, of course, this is an entirely option to the participants to decide whether they want to group or not different assets. But generally speaking, if you decide to group assets together and to aggregate the results, there are a few conditions that have to be present in order to do that in a meaningful and successful way. And namely, you should have reporting characteristics that do align across these different assets. And you see here these bullet points. So those assets should indeed be part of the same sector. So, well, you can imagine that grouping a wind farm or wind solar farm with a transport road, well, that wouldn't be appropriate, and I will explain you in a second why. Of course, they have to be to the same location, and more possibly not only from the same region, but from the same country. And they are supposed to have similar operational processes and scope of service as well. And well, that's why. And that's mainly because our materiality, which hopefully some of you are familiar with, is triggered by these components. What do I mean with that? Well, the materiality is basically determining the outcome of and the relevance of the indicators of your assessment. And it's just looking at information indeed such as sector, location, and operational processes. So in order to have relevance that is consistent and appropriate for the assets, they have to be aligning in terms of these characteristics. And once those conditions are fulfilled, indeed you're able to group those assets together and to aggregate the performance component at the same level.
Great, and we also have an example about this, which always makes it a bit more tangible than just simply, okay, this is how you do it. So in this example, we have 2 wind farms in Australia, and we have a toll road also in Australia, and another wind farm in Brazil. So Fabio, can you take us through that?
Yeah, that's very straightforward, hopefully, following the bullet points above. So you would not like to group, and you shouldn't group the 2 assets located in Australia with the one in South America, and you also shouldn't group together the 2 wind farms with roads. Indeed, the best preferred option, which is also the one that then become the most accurate one when it comes then to benchmarking this information, is to group the 2 assets from the same location, in this case Australia, and from the same sector, in this case wind farms, and namely those 2 green icons and assets displayed here in the map below. Great.
So I think it's also good to point out that we see a lot of different situations coming through, and if you have a situation yourself and you're not entirely sure how to approach it or what the best way to start reporting is, you can always reach out to us and we can talk it through with you and figure out together what the best solution is for you. So our team is very knowledgeable, as you can tell by Fabio's response. Thanks, Fabio. And maybe this ties in with the next topic, which is around evidence and how you can start your assessments. And David is our expert. And one thing we know a lot of participants are maybe less aware of is the fact that you can actually use templates across your assessments. David, how do templates work? Tell us.
Yeah. So yeah, a very regular question that comes through. So this is a tool that's particularly useful if you are a fund manager or an operator of multiple assets. Whereby, traditionally you can think of the example of policy documents which are applicable across the board throughout your group or your portfolio. And so what we offer you to do here is to effectively create a template of the assessment and apply that across the board to all your entities in the portal. So on the next slide, you should be able to see, once we move on, there we go. You should be able to see effectively how you can begin to create these templates. That little blue banner that takes up half the page gives you the steps from start to finish on how to actually implement the template. And we really highly encourage you to do this when you have multiple assets and similar policies or procedures that apply throughout Think as well, like the management systems is another good example. So encouraged to use it whenever you can.
Thanks, David. And we'll stay with you for a moment because the next topic is evidence. And David is our validation and evidence expert, so hopefully he can give you some tips and tricks around that too, especially when it comes to making sure that the right evidence applies to the right entities. And like you said, David, sometimes you have evidence that applies to multiple entities. You have the same policy shared by two assets. Can that still be used? Is that okay?
Yeah, so it's always possible to, well, not always, but generally it is possible to apply multiple documents, the same document to multiple entities. But you do need to be careful to always make sure that there is a clear link between the document that you're referring to and who wrote that document and the entity in question for which you're completing the assessment. So again, if we think back to the fund manager example, you may have a particular fund manager or an operator who have a policy in their name and they apply it to the assets that they run. And so we just need to make sure when submitting that evidence that either in the supporting text box or using this GRESB evidence cover page here on the slide, that you clearly show this link or that you explain this link in a sentence or two. So as a follow-up to that, what we also do like to really highlight is the usefulness of this GRESB evidence cover page. What it really is there to do primarily is to help you organize your information when submitting to our validators, particularly when you have multiple evidence pieces that are trying to support one indicator. So the way it's structured is we ask you to list off document names, and then in the second column, which issue or element you're trying to support. So think, for example, greenhouse gases or water or waste. And then you can state in that document where it's actually located, so a page number or some key words for the validators to use and identify. And this will help you avoid missing out unnecessarily on points for efforts that you have made.
Wow, that's really nice, David. Thank you for that. And relating to that, we obviously are a global benchmark. We have participants across the world, and some of their documents are probably not in English, but that is the language requirement. Is there a way around that? Can they still use those documents, or do they need to translate them in order for those documents to be eligible?
Yeah, another really common scenario. So we are a global benchmark, and a lot of people do ask us whether they can use documents from other languages. It's not possible. However, you don't need to translate the document entirely into English. All that we ask for is to apply the same logic as I was just mentioning earlier, which is identify the document that you are uploading, as well as the issue that you claim to be meeting, the checkbox or the topic. And then in the third column, you can put down a location of where this information is found in your document that's in another language, and just translate that piece of information. So putting the exact text of the other language in there alongside a translated version of it. So it's at the end of the day, you're really just trying to be pragmatic about it. So when you look at what you've provided as a GRESB evidence cover page, does it help your validator look at a document in another language and be able to pick out the core pieces in a translated format in here? Yeah.
Great, and then maybe to tie off this topic on evidence, we've also listed some tips and tricks that David will highlight very quickly. So David, take it away.
Yeah, so again, I guess this is just a little recap of what we have just discussed. So make it easy to find the right sections or paragraphs. So I identify those relevant pages. Use the evidence cover page that we just looked at to add references as much as possible. It does help to organize your thoughts. Then really only look to translate the relevant parts. There is no need to translate entire documents, only the parts that you are making claims for. Then, as mentioned earlier, you want to really not unnecessarily lose points for not making the link between the document and its applicability to your entity. So use the evidence cover page against you here to provide clarifications. And lastly, make sure to check evidence requirements in the reference guide. So in our reference guide, we have a section called the validation sections that you can also click the guidance button in your portal to see these descriptions. And this bullet is particularly in reference to those who use Prefill. If you use Prefill, it's a great tool. It saves a lot of time. However, you need to be mindful that a document you may have used last year could be outside of the acceptable reporting period this year. So, for example, integrated reports are reports that are valid for a 3-year period. So they're okay for 2 years, but in the 3rd year, you need to change them. So being mindful of those requirements when using Prefill is really important to not lose unnecessary points.
Thanks, David. That's helpful and hopefully beneficial to also our attendees. Thank you for that. And this is the final part of our Q&A about managing the response and how to navigate the portal and making sure you're not skipping the wrong questions maybe, or actually answering all the right ones. And that's the first question that we have is how do I know whether an indicator is scored and whether I need to report on it or not? Fabio, where can we see this in the portal?
Right. Also, another very common question that we do receive, especially during the reporting window. Indeed, as I was explaining before, well, the scoring indicators may vary depending on the entity and reporting characteristics. So as a premise, like you should really start when you start the assessments and filling in the information and entity and reporting characteristics first, because that will trigger and determine the relevance of all the indicators in the assessment and also the type of relevance, like medium or high relevance, that have a different impact on the final scoring of the entity itself. Once you're done with that, of course, you can go on and fill in the assessment, starting either with the management component or also the performance one. And here you will be able to see in the assessment portal which indicators are supposed to be scored according to your materiality outcome, if those are materiality driven, which is the case for most of the performance one. So here we have an example of the water indicator, WT1 and WT2. And well, you see that the first one has an outcome of medium relevance, meaning that it has indeed an impact on the score. You can see the maximum score points that you can reach if you fill the full indicator. And below, we have a second example of WT2, which in this case, according to the reporting characteristics of this entity, has no relevance. And it doesn't contribute to the score. And in fact, you can indeed see that the maximum score is 0. So of course, you can go ahead and fill even the second part of the indicator, but that will not have any repercussion on your final score. If you decided to leave it blank and to select no, that will also be completely fine. An additional note now that we are on this page is if you seek for more guidance around the indicators and well, the intent of the indicator or their structure and what you're supposed to report on, we do have this guidance button that you can hover, and they will prompt a text that will explain the general intent of the indicators itself. So we do have quite some questions. Of course, we have hard documents, but this is a way more interactive way to do so, indicator by indicator, while you report your entity.
Great, thanks, Fabio. That's very helpful, and I love that feature that you can immediately see your score. That's a game changer. And relating to that, because we have this performance component with very quantitative indicators, and we'll go to the next slide and show you an example of one. And there's a lot of boxes in this, going on in this indicator. Are all of those required to be filled out by the participants in order to submit? Are some of those ones you can maybe skip? I'm guessing yes, seeing an optional button. Can you take us through that, Fabio?
Right. So no, to answer your question, they are not all to be filled. Well, there are some that has to be filled if you want to obtain a certain score. But going step by step, of course, you will have, and connecting to the prefill option before, information from last year, which is already automatically pre-filled. Well, you need to have a 2021 assessments to have previous year performances, obviously. Then when it will come to the second column, so the reporting year performance, the cells, so the metrics and the cells that have highlighted a green border are the ones that are supposed to be mandatory. So if you miss out one of these metrics and you don't report information because, let's say, you either don't collect it or you don't have it, there will be an error that is triggered here on the right side. You kind of see that is already saying WT1 performance blank, and that's because there are some values. So in order to finish this indicator and to complete it, you have to report under all the mandatory metrics. Well, the simple reason is that they will contribute to the calculated ones, which is indeed the scored one. And all scored metrics are this one highlighted in light blue, I would say. This is light blue. And the same reasoning applies for all the other indicators in the performance component side. So for energy indicators, greenhouse gas emissions and such. Now, when it comes to the one on targets, so both on reporting year and future year targets, those are optional metrics. So if you don't report there, it's completely fine. No error will appear and you will be able to go on. But if you do report there, and especially in this case, if you report on total water withdrawals, then you will be entitled to have full points for the indicator because 2 of these metrics are scored. And of course, needless to say that if you report information on future year targets, you will also have to select an year for those targets. Otherwise, you will not be able to go on. But yeah, that's generally speaking how those tables work.
Great. So I can skip my targets for surface water and not lose points, but if I don't have them for water withdrawals, I will lose out, right? That's how it works.
Yes.
Great. Okay. That's good to know. I don't have a surface water target, so that's something I need to not worry about. That's good. Thanks for that, Fabio. And then I think another question we see around the performance component that comes back, I think every year, is ISO certification. So David, I have an ISO certification management system. Why can't I use that for my CA1 response? Why do you guys not accept that?
Yeah. Yeah, really common question and a very valid one as well. So to start off, it's first important to state that we do value and reward through the assessment ISO certification, so the management system type effort. But we also have a separate section, as you can see here, for certifications that apply to the physical built asset. So walking through quickly what the ISO is, I mean, ISOs revolve around the company's ability to implement a robust system that governs operations at the organizational level. So the traditional approach is always plan, do, check, act. And at that stage, the company is trying to establish objectives and processes necessary to deliver on a particular organizational policy. They then implement this process, monitor it, measure progress, as well as progress against commitments, and all the while taking action along the way to continuously improve these operations. For these efforts, as I mentioned earlier, points are awarded for the management systems indicator in RM1 of the asset assessment. On the other hand, the CA1 indicator looks to reward entities for certifications that apply not at the organizational level, but rather at the physical built asset level. So some examples of certifications such as SQL or the Shore standard. And instead, what these guys do is they assure the assets based on engineering or technical requirements that were met. So for example, efforts to make the structures more resilient or energy efficient. So for this, we award a separate set of points. And it's important to note that this list of certifications that one can select from in the dropdown in the assessment is limited, but you can request to have certifications added to this list by sending us an email, and before sending us an email, make sure that they meet the requirements in the appendix in our reference guide that refers to this. But there's basically 5 requirements which we need to meet. So it's a field. The infrastructure sector is, in terms of certifications, is growing. It's much more common in the real estate sector, but it's out there, and we do want to reward those who make the effort to do so separately.
Great, thanks, David. That's really good to know. So hopefully that'll solve that one. Right, that was, I hope, very insightful to everyone. And we are now ready for the live Q&A. So if you haven't already done so, please start putting your questions into the Q&A function. I see quite a lot of people have already done so. That's really good to see. And we'll tackle those one by one. So I see quite a lot of questions already. So if we don't manage to cover yours, don't worry, we'll give you a response after the session is over. So your question will be answered one way or another. So I'll start off with a question from one of our anonymous attendees. And it's, if you want to create your own evidence cover page and upload it with your evidence, would that be still okay? How would a participant use that? I think, Fabio, you were able to answer that, right?
Definitely. So indeed, it's not a problem. First of all, like, we do provide this template, but that's a template, so it's not mandatory to use it. The reason why we provide a template is because, well, first of all, our third-party validation team is used to that, and second of all, it hopefully it provides, and according to us, it provides a good way for you to pinpoint the ESG issues you select, and to make a clear reference out of the evidence you do provide. But of course, if you have a different cover page, you can still use it, and as long as there is a connection between the different ESG issues you select and the full evidence, that should be all right. And I would say a similar answer applies to the certifications one. We do have a certification cover page that we do ask people to upload or to send to us when we then have to evaluate a new certification process. But that's not a mandatory requirement to apply for a new certification.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for that, Fabio. We have one question it's almost philosophical in nature. Someone's asking, what is your definition of an infrastructure asset? Well, that's something that gets debated around the GRESB offices from time to time too. So I'm sure the guys are very happy to put their teeth into that one. So the question is, we have a large stake in a company that manufactures a product that does not fit into an appropriate GRESB sector classification. Do we report this in the infra fund and infra asset assessments? And how does that work if we classify it incorrectly? So David, would you be able to explain or give an approach for that situation?
Yeah, sure. So naturally, I don't really know off the top of my immediately what kind of manufacturing goes on, what kind of product you offer, but from the sounds of it, this would be something that we would classify within the infrastructure asset assessment. It sounds like when you're manufacturing this product, there are going to be operational metrics that you're able to report on. What I would actually advise in this case would be to contact us using our help desk form, and we can basically dig a little bit more into what exactly you are manufacturing to understand what sector it is that you'd fit in most. But to answer a part of that question, I'd say it sounds to me like you would fit best in the infra asset assessment, and indeed getting it wrong, participating in the fund assessment instead of the asset assessment can just mean that you don't get very insightful benchmark data for your particular case. So please do reach out to us, and I will pick up the question when I see it in our help desk.
Definitely, and if I can add on this, in the meantime, you can always look at the classification we do align with. So, well, while it may be not that straightforward sometimes to define assets or the definition of an asset, we do align with the DEC infrastructure classification, which is a globally recognized classifications. It's called the TICS, so the Infrastructure Company Classification Standards, with whom GRESB also contributes on a yearly basis for the updates. And while this reference, I believe, is listed under EC2 of our reference guide, so indicator entity characteristics 2. And you can always have a look, and there they do explain a full definition per the different per sector, which are 34. And you can start having a look at that and see if something fits within the asset you're working on.
Great, thanks. And I'm seeing so many great questions coming in. So we'll tackle them one by one. Don't worry, we'll get to them. And if we don't get to them in the session, like I said, we will get back to you afterwards. So we have this amazing question coming in from Heather. She's asking with questions. Ooh, there's no question coming in. It's like just hidden it from me. There we go. With questions referring to employees, we find this difficult to answer for our assets as we don't have real employees for the legal entities that we are reporting for. They are employed by another legal entity and contracted to the asset. So they have great examples of how they work with the workers of the asset, but they are relevant to contractors. How can they handle that in the evidence, and how can they sort of make sure that that gets explained properly? So I think, Fabio, you can answer that, can't you? Sorry.
What, sorry, Katie?
I said, I think you selected that you would like to answer this. So are you happy to answer that?
Yeah, the one from Ether, right?
Sorry,
yeah.
what?
I'm also lost in the chat. The one from Ether, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so yeah, indeed. That's a very interesting question. And actually, I was now scrolling through the chat where a lot of questions are coming in. And some of them have all similar answers in the sense, as we were saying before, not all the indicators may be relevant for your entity. And that's a really good example of employees. So if you have an entity that doesn't have employees, you will be able to report under the RC7, which is the materiality assessment, as I was saying before, under reporting characteristics, which determine the relevance of different indicators. There you will be able to select that the entities as less than 10 employees and actually as 0 employees. And of course, this will trigger then the outcome of indicators such as employment engagement under EM1. And if you there, then we'll see that the outcome is no relevance or low relevance. That will mean that it will have an impact, no impact, sorry, on the score. And of course, you will be able to select no for the overall indicator. So that's a really good way to understand situations like this one, where you're like, oh, this question seems to be a bit strange. It doesn't seem to be applicable to my entity at all, or we don't have information around this one because we don't deem it necessary or relevant. So a really good tip is indeed always looking at the materiality outcome. And we do have also a very useful tool that can help and assist in this process, and namely, well, it's an Excel tool. We call it the materiality and scoring tool, where in there you're really able to play around and put different options within the reporting characteristics, and then in another sheet live see the different outcomes per indicator and the scoring distributions. So I would say that's the way to move forward when we have this type of questions.
Thanks, Fabio. And I think relating to that, I see a question on how those risk materialities are actually determined. That's a governance-related process, right? So
right. Yeah, so it's important. Yeah, that's the one I was looking before when you were pinpointing on the employee one, and it's fairly connected. So GRESB doesn't come on its own with the final risk materiality outcomes. That's true for sectors determined, but in generally speaking, for the materiality results within infrastructure assets, we do have a thorough process whereby we engage with our industry groups, and they are the one. So the industry is the one responsible for setting those outcomes. So that's how it generally speaking works. I think you're on mute, Katie.
Sorry, I didn't click properly. Apologies. I said thanks, Fabio. I see a question from Yiska around the fund assessment. So we've talked a bit about the asset assessment. I thought it would be nice to switch over to the other assessment for a moment. She's asking, I have a question relating to RP1. Investor report aligned with third-party standards, such as the PRI reporting framework. What does it mean to be aligned with PRI? Is that in reference to the 6 principles of PRI? And how can we prove that the investor report is in fact in line with the PRI reporting framework? So David, maybe this is one you can help answer.
Yeah, sure. So my answer won't be specifically to PRI. I think it actually applies to any reporting framework that you are claiming to be aligned with. So in essence, what we are trying to see is that well, when you make a claim that you're aligned with another standard, it's kind of, is the report that you're presenting, so investor report, sustainability report, integrated report, whatever it might be, is the information that's found in that report aligned with the standard that you're claiming to be aligned with. And by that, we mean if you were to take the requirements of that standard that you are claiming to be aligned with, so the metrics that they require, the indicators that they ask for information on, you want to basically show that you're aligned with a good part of it. And what's also important is obviously also in your reports give some information on how much alignment there is, because you can have full alignment, partial alignment, and that's actually all fine. We don't actually score that, but you want to give a sense of how much of these standards that you're claiming to be aligned with you actually are aligned with. So in the case of PRI, again, it's the 6 principles are a good example. So there's requirements there around what kind of information PRI require. If you can incorporate that into your report, then you would be able to claim that you're aligned with them. And the same thing goes with things like topics like standards such as GRI or SASB.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, so it's good to know that you can save some trouble there. Thanks there, David. That's good to know. I see a question coming in from Jennifer as well. She's asking, don't investors automatically get access if you are outside of your first year of submitting a GRESB assessment? I think this relates maybe a little bit to the grace period, which we haven't covered in the FAQs. Fabio, would you be able to answer that one?
So definitely. Well, first of all, investors do get access only when you grant them access. So nobody will be able to see your responses just because they have an access to the portal. That's very important to remind, because GRESB has very strict policy when it comes to data confidentiality. So, well, once you grant an access to a certain investor member, of course, this decision, unless you decide to revoke it, will be there, meaning that, well, they will be able to see your 2021 response, but of course, they will be able to see this year's response. Of course, for first-year participants, there is indeed an option, as Cathy was mentioning, to select a grace period. As we saw before during the presentation, these can be selected at the start of the assessment. And there you're basically able to hide your score for the first year. And this is indeed important to remind that is only an option that you have the first year you participate within GRESB. So from the second year on, you will not see this option displayed anymore. But generally speaking, Jennifer, like, you are really responsible for deciding who is able and to which extent people and investors in this case are able to see your results and your assessments.
Thanks, Fabio. Yeah, that's a really good one to keep emphasizing. You're in control of your data and who gets to see it. So, and you can revoke access at any time, as we tried to show at the beginning as well. I see two similarly, well, somewhat related questions coming in. So I see one question around whether climate resilience questions will be scored, and another around whether implementation will be scored in the future. Fabio, David, who wants to answer this one?
Sure, I can go ahead. So regarding the climate resilience question, so everything, all of our indicators that relate to TCFD, which were incorporated last year after the introduction over the last 3 years of our resilience module, those indicators for now continue to not be scored, at least for 2022. It is in discussion, and we continue to speak with our stakeholder groups to see whether this is something that will be scored in the future. We are currently working quite hard on a roadmap, and talking a lot about this whole topic that we call efforts and outcomes. So scoring really information that provides a good idea of which assets really perform better than others. And as part of that work, we may see these indicators either be updated in content and scored on an outcome basis, or we may just start scoring the process of being more resilient more, but that's yet to be seen. So for 2022, it's not scored, but there is a possibility of it being scored in future years.
Thanks, David. I'm seeing loads of great questions, so keep them coming. We're going through them as quickly as we can. I saw one question coming in from Huguette, that's a very, very nice name. I hope I'm pronouncing it okay. And they're asking, is it possible to have access to best practices? Fabio, do we have anything for them if that's the case? Do we have
Yes, that's also a good one. So we've been working actually the past year around providing to participants more examples around best practices, or as we call them in our reference guides, good practices example. And well, this year we've been able to engage with some of our participants that perform very well across different indicators. And we did manage to select few examples that can be deemed as best practices. So the best way to look at this is just indeed taking hands on the reference guides on the asset level. And well, you will see that under each indicator, especially on the management side, there are many references listed in there. And at the end of those references, there is also a good practice section where we do provide some hyperlinks of evidence pieces that got fully accepted evidence and are deemed as best practices. Of course, we don't have, as of now, that for each indicator, but the bigger we grow and the more participants we get and the better they perform, the more we will add this information. So you can already start and look ahead in our documents, and I'm sure that this will help. And of course, if more questions are connected to that, and if you want to provide more information, we are always happy to help. And I guess Cathy will also explain it a bit later with some of our services.
Absolutely. Thanks, Fabio. I'm seeing another question coming in around ISO and management standards. So I think this is definitely one for David. Someone's asking, could you explain how to prove asset management standards are aligned with ISO standards? And again, asking for a best practice example. So this ties in very nicely with what Fabio just said. David, how to do this?
Yeah. So generally, what the validators look for is that the evidence must obviously include the name of the standard that you're claiming to align with, and to then define the degree of alignment. As I mentioned earlier, it's similar to with the RP1 situation. But here, examples of what you can do to show this alignment is to, show the elements of the management system that actually align with the standard, which can be summarized, called out, highlighted, or shown through diagrams and through tables. So, examples of appropriate evidence might include a policy, strategy, plan, annual report, corporate presentation, all the rest. So what you really want to be showing is that you want to make a claim about the degree of alignment, and then show some clear links between what is required as part of that management system. So the requirements that are part of that, and how your process incorporates some of those requirements which would have been needed to be certified. So you're not fully certified, but you're making the effort to align with some of the requirements. And as soon as the validators can see that link, then they are happy to award the points. I hope that helps.
I thought that was very helpful, David, but I'm a bit biased. So hopefully that was also helpful to our participants. I'm seeing a great question coming in from Bonnie. Bonnie is asking, there's some issues with this asset I'm supporting with their reporting. They did reporting last year, but I'm only joining now, and I'm seeing maybe there are some issues there, not the right data reported last year, some evidence not entirely being reported correctly. Can they change the baseline here still? And is this very easy? And can they change the relevance level of some of the issues? How would that work? So Fabio, can you maybe help a little there? Because that seems like a tough one.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, as I was saying before, our materiality outcomes and how it generally speaking works in that sense, it's not something that is set in stone, but you cannot change that on your own. Of course, we are very much keen on having feedback from our participants and to potentially change certain outcomes if we deem that necessary and appropriate. I would say, well, Bonnie, if you are new to our assessments, well, maybe a good way of learning a bit more is looking at the training, and there they provide really useful information, especially also on the infrastructure side, which is a bit different from our real estate assessments. And well, if you started with prefilling template, maybe we can take this also offline. but we may have an option to revert these. Of course, we said before, participants are not able to do so, but we are happy to help in that sense. If you feel that some of the information that were inputted last year are not incorrect for these current assessments.
Thanks, Fabio. And maybe it's also good to point out that the quantitative data, so the last year's performance data, doesn't factor into scoring. So if that's not correct, I mean, that's not important for now. What you can always do is provide a little bit of context, right? We have the little text boxes below each indicator, right, Fabio?
Yeah, we do. We definitely do have that. You can explain in there additional information if you deem. And I also want to add, maybe that's not fully clear. The materiality outcome, of course, also changes if you change the responses on the entity and reporting characteristics this year. So let's say if last year's information were also not filled properly and the outcomes were not relevant or deemed as relevant as per the sector we're talking about in the assets. Well, if you manage to adjust this information this year, the final outcome should be reflecting those adjustments.
Oh, that's good to know. So Bonnie, maybe that's something that will help. And I think if you have more specific questions around your specific situation, please do get in touch with us one-on-one, and we'll try to help you there. Thanks for that, Fabio. I thought that was quite interesting to hear about. Again, so many great questions. Keep them coming. We might not get to all of them, but we'll do our best. And I'm seeing one question around personnel ESG performance targets. Does the entity include ESG factors in the annual performance targets of personnel? What kind of documents are accepted around this? Because that might be a difficult one to answer. What are the validation criteria? And if there's asset management agreement for an operations and maintenance contractor, would that be valid if it includes ESG? Well, that's a big question. So David, maybe this is one you can help tackle here.
Yeah. So the good news is it's not, there aren't restrictions on the types of documents that you can provide us. What we're really looking for, or rather what the validators are really looking for, is three key pieces, and it's got to do with, I mean, the KPIs that are being used to measure this ESG performance, the impact, so whether it's a financial or non-financial consequence. So, you know, does it lead to raises? Does it lead to some sort of compensation, employee of the month type of awards? And lastly, to whom does it apply? So that's where you can classify the name, and well, not necessarily the name, but at least the title of the person who is being affected by these performance targets. And being able to show those links, you know, it could come from different documents because you might not have everything neatly in one place, but if you can summarize it somewhere and provide those documents as supporting evidence, should the validators want to have a look at it, then you should be fine. So again, you know, these operations and maintenance contracts are you know, or other types of documents that you might want to use should be acceptable. It's all about making sure that the information is clear to the validators rather than having strict types of documents.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think that's such a crucial thing to keep re-emphasizing, because the validators are, you know, they don't know anything about your asset. They don't know anything about what you're doing. They only have the documents and the information that you upload to make a case on it, to sort of understand what's going on. And they do try to take it from a positive side, so they will try to give you the benefit of the doubt if there's if they can tell that an effort is being made. But making it easy for them is always a good thing to do. Great. So I see a question coming in around HS2. So that's health and safety for contractors in the asset assessment. And the question is, should the entity report the overall H&S performance of their contractors, just the H&S performance of the contractor when it was working for the entity or the entity's customer, or just their own workforce performance? Fabio, where to draw the line here? What goes in and what goes out?
Yes, also this one can be very much dependent on the type of asset and the situation we are talking about. But generally speaking, GRESB refers to contractors as persons or individuals that work on site and off site on behalf of the entity, meaning that we always look at this information from an entity's perspective. So in this case, from the asset perspective. So in health and safety for contractors, you're supposed to report information that relate to the contractors that have been employed by the assets, or by whoever responsible within the asset that have been working in that time for the asset itself. So that's generally speaking how these questions and actually other similar questions that could be around users or employees directly are supposed to be responsible. The point of view is always from the asset or entity, reporting entity perspective.
Yeah, and I think that ties in with another question I'm seeing here around assets that oversee project work at third-party facilities, so client or project sites. Would they still be required to report on those third-party locations? I think that's probably a very similar answer, no?
Yes, that's very similar indeed. You're supposed to provide information just for the direct employees in this case, or well, on the contractors that do work directly with the asset itself.
Great, thanks. And
so they should report as well that only what is looking for the facility, for the assets owned by the assets and the assets facilities themselves.
Yes, exactly. So focus on what's yours and you can ignore what's not yours, basically. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Such a selfish approach, but okay, we'll take it. Thanks, Fabio. I'm seeing a fantastic question that I'm absolutely loving. So someone's asking, we've been benchmarked against 5 other submitters. Can we see those submittals to determine what we are doing? Fabio, David, I think you said you want to answer this question. Do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. So there in the default setting that all participants have, you cannot know the names of the peers in your group. That is obviously for particular privacy and legal reasons. However, there is a feature in the assessment portal whereby you can select to disclose your score with your peers. So you will have seen this as a question at the start of your assessment when you began, but you can also see it again if you go into your assessment portal and go to there's a little gear icon in your assessment portal. And if you click on that gear, there should be data sharing settings as an option, and something similar, I forget verbatim what it's called, but it's something of the sort. And in there, you'll find, again, this radio option to select this option. And what that actually does is any other peer in your group who decides to also select yes will allow you to see their score and their name in your benchmark report and vice versa. So you, in that sense, if people do start to be transparent about this, you can actually start to compare and see who your peers really are, because otherwise all you can rely on is the actual benchmark information at the indicator levels, which tell you how your peers in general perform, but not on a one-to-one. It's always you versus your peers as a set. Yeah.
Thanks, David. And maybe also good to mention, it's just the top line scores that you're able to see, right? Just the management and performance scores, not the individual indicator scores from your competitors. So you get to see those alone. So don't worry about, them seeing your entire benchmark report. Your benchmark report, again, is not shared with anyone you don't want it to be shared with. It's entirely up to you to make sure to give access to the people you want to have access to it. Thanks for that, David. Great. I'm seeing another question. This is someone who's super eager. Fabio, if we are answering a non-mandatory question, do we improve our rating? What would you say to that?
Unfortunately not, although probably your investor will be very happy to see that you disclose information even that is not deemed as medium or high relevance. So it's still actually a useful and a best practice example, I would say. And that's because, well, the GRESB rating is, generally speaking, the result of the performance and management scores aggregated together by their own weight. And of course, if you're answering to a non-mandatory question that is not scored, then this will have also in turn no implication on the scoring itself and therefore on the rating. But you're very much welcome to report information and all the information you track in the assessments. The more you report, I would say, the more complete would be your final assessments and therefore benchmarking information as well.
Thanks, Fabio. I'm seeing that there are some more questions, but we are running to the end of the hour and I kind of want to wrap up and show you some of our resources. So if you have a question that's still open, don't worry, we'll get back to you after this session and you'll get a nice response. All the sessions are being recorded and we'll share those as well. And I think we'll also have some of the questions that came in on the chat listed as part of that. So don't worry about that. Okay, so let's go and close very quickly. We'll just want to show you there are loads of resources on our website, so have a look at those. We have our reference guides there, scoring documents. We have our Excel formats assessments. We have the materiality tool that's been referenced, and we also have an excellent Scope 3 guidance document, so do have a look at that. David rightly points out that if you are an anonymous attendee and you've asked a question, please actually send us an email, because we won't know who you are otherwise. And that's a very good point, David. I should have realized that. Because yeah, you're anonymous. So please use our help desk form, which I'll show in a moment as well. Let's see, we have our training platform that was very briefly referenced. So please have a look at that. We have excellent training videos around the assessment, very detailed as well. And you can follow those at your own leisure, which is kind of convenient. So that's great. We also have our response checks available. They're available for purchase in the reporting portal right now. So you can go to the shop icon and purchase one. Note that the deadline is June 1st. So first come, first serve. You want to get there sooner rather than later if this is something you're considering. And we're happy to give you any explanations on what a response check is if you're interested. So finally, you can always contact us through our help desk form, which is under contact. We have an amazing team. We have a lot of people working on our help desk, so a lot of people available to you. They have a really quick response rate, much faster than if you were to email me individually, for sure. I'm not so good with my emails as the help desk team is, thank God. So do reach out to us and send us your questions. Just a very big, very quick reminder of the time frame. So July 1st, the portal closes. So don't forget about that. And concluding that, I would like to thank everyone really for joining today. And I want to thank Fabio and David for being such excellent panelists. And we look forward to seeing all your submissions come in the next couple of months. And please let us know if you have any questions, comments, ideas. We are a member-driven organization, and we love to be in touch with you. So thank you again for your time today.